Hi, folks. Today I'm going to be talking about zines and research justice with you. So who am I? My name is Dawn Stahura. I am a research and instruction librarian and the zine librarian at Salem State University. I'm also someone who wholeheartedly believes that our stories matter and do change the world. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a queer, white, non-disabled, middle-class, non-Christian feminist. And I'm also a zinester, artist, best friend, mother, partner, and mama of my super cute feminist dog named Stevie Nicks. And my identities and how they intersect shape the way I walk in the world and the way I'm perceived by others. And my positionality statements help us see where we uphold the status quo. So I share with you the previous slide and tell you a little bit about my identity and the ways in which they intersect so that you can get a sense of who I am. But I also like to share it so that I can hear my identities and how they intersect so that I know where I can push against the status quo and begin to dismantle systems of oppression. So using my privilege in order to do that. So while zines can really look any way you can dream them to look, they do have some common characteristics that I want to share with you. So the first one is that they're self-published. The creator answers to no one. And this, I think, is really important because when we think about traditional methods of publishing, we usually have an editor involved. We've got a peer review process and academic spaces where folks can kind of say yes or no. Then we've got a publisher who's also going to have some limitations imposed upon whatever it is that you're trying to publish. And so none of these folks are in the zine process. So you get to write whatever it is you want to write, and then you get to control how you disseminate that information. Because of it, because you're going to publish them yourself, usually they are small self-distributed print runs, so usually less than 50 copies. And this is because copying is a financial barrier. As you all know, either being students or ever having to go to Staples, for example, to make copies of something, you know how expensive in particular copying in color can be. And so for that reason, most folks make small amounts of the zines that they create. They are anti-capitalist, so you're not going to make a bazillion dollars making your zine. In fact, in most zine communities, zines are traded, right? So money is not even exchanged. It's, oh, wow, I really like your zine. Can I give you my zine for your zine? And so what this really shows is that the motivation for creating zines is really about sharing stories and building community. They push against dominant narratives. And so we'll see throughout this presentation just how problematic mainstream media and also things inside of academia are, and ways in which zines push against that. They're low budget, so you don't have to have special equipment or special software or have all of this knowledge in order to create a zine. Other than the photocopier, that can be that financial barrier. You literally can have just a sheet of paper and a pencil and make a zine, and you don't have to share your zine in order for it to be a zine. So it really can be however you conceive it to be. And it really does live by this ethos of by us, for us. So we want to share information about our community with other people so that they can begin to either understand, or we can combat against some of the stereotypes that are often attached to marginalized groups. So this is by far not an exhaustive timeline of zines, but I do think it's helpful to kind of see the different groups that have made zines. And I think the one thing you can probably notice by looking at this timeline is that these groups are marginalized groups who did not see their stories represented in mainstream media, or they saw their stories being grossly misconstrued. So zines were one way in order to push against that narrative about them. So I encourage folks to come back to this slide, and all of the links lead out to different archives so that you can really see the kinds of zines that these groups were creating and kind of what that impact was. So there's a lot going on behind mainstream media that a lot of us are just simply not aware of. The first being that there are only 6 companies that control every news outlet that includes cable, newspapers, magazines, social media. This is definitely a monopoly, and it's by design with mergers and capitalism. And we did not start out with just 6 media companies, but it has been whittled down to that. And the problem with that is that we've got 6 companies that get to decide what stories get shared, who gets to share the stories. But maybe more important than that is they get to decide which stories never see the light of day. We have a particular company that owns the vast majority of news outlets. So these are the affiliates. So if you think about, ABC has an affiliate in Las Vegas, and there's an ABC in New York and an ABC station in Chicago. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about news outlets. And there are about 2.2 million households that watch one of these local affiliates. And so there is one company that controls and owns these news outlets. And in a moment, we'll see what the problem with that is. And we also know, just by paying attention to the news and mainstream media, that scientific and medical news is often told in these very quick 1-minute segments. They're usually oversimplified and glamorized to attract viewers, which means we're never getting the true big picture of what the scientific discovery was or what the new medical advancement is. So here is a quick video that we'll watch that will hopefully show you what's going on behind the Sinclair Broadcasting Group.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about the trouble and trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
Plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 So hopefully this has illustrated for you, and I think this video is really outstanding, that what is really happening is that the Sinclair Broadcasting Group writes the scripts for the news segments, and those are sent to all of the news affiliates, so that the news anchor really has no wiggle room in how they talk about a story. And obviously the implications of this are we are not getting a nuanced look at what is actually happening in the world. We are getting a very narrow, sort of vetted at the top story that may or may not be accurate. So this this slide and then the next couple of slides is another way to think about mainstream media and just how there are a lot of voices that do not get amplified. So if you want to pause the video here and just sort of think for a moment whether or not you recognize any of these three individuals, please don't Google, just take a moment and see. My suspicion is that one of them you definitely know. So the first person is Mari Copeny, also known as Little Miss Flint. So at 8 years old, she writes a letter to President Obama. She's telling him about what's happening in Flint, Michigan around the water. He reads her letter, and then he goes out to meet her. And this is really the beginning of the national attention to the Flint water crisis. Mari is now 16 years old, so that's her photo there on the right. And she's still actively fighting for clean water in Michigan. So she is an activist out there trying to fight for legislation and policy changes so that her community and the communities at large have access to clean water. This is Autumn Peltzer. She is an indigenous water warrior. And when she was 13 years old, she addressed the world leaders at the UN General Assembly on the issue of water protection. And so she also, like Mari, is someone who is out in her community, also on obviously a international stage, right? Because she addressed the UN General Assembly and is talking about the right for clean water. And now we have Greta, which I think most of you, this is the person that you recognized. And I'm not surprised. Every time I do this presentation, Greta is always recognized. She's a Swedish environmental activist. She also led a climate activism protest march. She has become the face of climate change. And there is even a documentary about her called I, Greta. So I ask you to think about why it is that Greta is the face of climate change and not Mari or Autumn, or why it is that you know about Greta and you don't know about Mari or Autumn, yet both of them are doing the same kind of work that Greta is. And the answer to that might seem too simple, but it is because Greta is white. She is less threatening than a Black or Indigenous person, and she is easier, I think, for the dominant group, which are white people, to get behind. So that is why she is really the face of climate change. And so now I ask again, who are these folks? And I will tell you that each of these three folks are activists. So see if you recognize them. So the first activist is Angela Davis, who is amazing. And she is not only an activist, she's a professor, she's an author. She was an active member of the Communist Party and the Black Panther Party. And she spoke at convocation at Salem State a few years ago. She really is amazing, and has done a lot of important work around the criminal justice system. This is Gloria Steinem. So she's an American journalist. She's also an activist. She was really seen as one of the leaders of second wave feminism, although she certainly was not the only person involved in second wave feminism. And also to say that there were other women who were not white who were a part of second wave feminism. She was also a columnist of the New York Magazine and co-founder of Miss Magazine. So she is really well recognized in activist circles. And this is Anna Mae Aquash. This is someone that I have yet to have students know who this is. So she was a First Nation activist. She moved to Boston in the 1960s and joined other First Nations and Indigenous Americans and started the Boston Indian Council, which is now known as the North American Indian Center of Boston. She was also part of the American Indian movement. She participated at the Wounded Knee and also at the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in these occupations and protests. And in 1976, her body was found and her murder was not solved until 27 years later. And I bring this up because Anna Mae did amazing work, made a difference, started organizations, fought hard for recognition, not recognition for herself, but recognition on the things that were happening in Indigenous communities, especially around police brutality. And yet her name is never uttered. So this is to say, there are a lot of people and a lot of situations that happen that mainstream media neglects to showcase. So how many mass shootings have there been since January of 2023? This is probably an atrocious amount. I can tell you that as of today, there were 317. And I would like you to ask yourself why it is that you don't know about all 317 of these. And it is because race plays an important role in what stories get shared. So it matters who the victims are, and it matters who the shooter is. So I wish I could say that these kinds of oppression does not happen inside the ivory tower, but I would 100% be lying to you. So here in academia, we have a very westernized and colonizer idea of what constitutes research, knowledge, and expertise. So when we think about other groups of folks like indigenous groups, where they have a very rich oral tradition and storytelling and that ancestral and cultural knowledge, that is frowned upon in the westernized idea of what knowledge can look like or what knowledge should be allowed inside academia. Scholarly publishing is built upon privilege. So there are more white dudes than any other tenured faculty. This is true for Salem State. This is true for, academia as a whole. So what that means is that folks who get tenured, obviously they have more power, and they get more spotlight on the work that they produce. Certainly white dudes are not the only people that are doing research, but it means that they have a platform where they can get their research published, where their non-white, non-male counterparts do not. So hopefully you've kind of gotten a sense of why someone would turn to zines as a way to disseminate information. And so I kind of have these three pillars that I think are really important when we are thinking about why someone would want to make a zine. So you get to be producers of information. So much of what we do in academia and also just out in the world is just passively consume information. It just goes, our eyeballs go over it and we take it in. And when we create zines, we really get a chance to critique and question authority, especially inside academia, where oftentimes students don't get that opportunity and permission to question the academy. But I think it's important. The personal is political. So everything we do is political, like our bodies are politicized. For many of us, we know that maybe more than the person sitting next to us, depending on who we are and our identities. You attending college and viewing this presentation right now is a political act. If education wasn't political, we wouldn't see all this really gross legislation trying to be passed in certain states here in the United States that kind of are attempting to squash people's access to information. You're an expert of your own lived experiences, and these experiences are oftentimes at odds with dominant narratives and ways of knowing. And I can tell you from just experience and being in academia for like a million years, that the space that's carved out for you as a student to be an expert is very, very small. And zines are just one way to take that power back. You get to critically evaluate mainstream media, scholarly resources, and you get to creatively push against oppression when you create zines and put them out into the world. Zines are a lot about storytelling, and that your stories matter, and zines are just one way that you can share your story with a broader audience. And stories build community. They build empathy, they build solidarity. We know this from just looking at political movements, and the things that stick with us are those personal stories. And sometimes all it takes is for you to realize that you're not alone, and that power in recognizing that there are other people in the same sort of situation as you is a good motivator to start trying to push against the system. So capitalism tells us that sharing our stories is not valuable unless it can make a profit, and it sees our lives as a consumer product. And that profit that capitalism would like for us to earn does not usually go to us. It goes back into capitalism. It goes back into the system. And this is bullshit, folks. I wholeheartedly believe that creativity and the sharing of stories is the most powerful tool that we have as human beings, because we are all innately creative, and we all are stories, right? We're comprised of stories. So I urge you to share your story because you want to share your story because you have to share your story as if your life depends on it, because for so many of you, it does. So I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation, and I hope that you're inspired to make your own zine, whether that be for a class project that you found yourself in, or you're just want to get involved in the world of zines, and I certainly would like to help you do that in any way that I can. So please, please, please reach out. You can send me an email, or if you happen to be near Salem State, you can always drop by the library at the help desk and ask for me. And just remember, folks, you matter always.